was just cleaning up a little bit around the shop, and I ran across these antlers that I bought at a swap meet a couple of years ago. And these reminded me of a project I did 8 years ago. I made a shelf out of some cherry that I actually had the opportunity to help run the sawmill, and we milled this stuff out of some logs that were at a friend of a friend's farm. And I kept some of the bark on this wood, and it made for the neatest shelf ever. I took some pretty good pictures of the whole process, and even though that was 8 years ago, this bark is still on the shelves. So let's get right to it. We'll look through these pictures. It's really cool. Stay watching. You're watching On the Mark with Mark.
Doesn't that look nice? See how that bark stayed right on there? That's the cherry. Here's how it began. Several pieces, of course. Now I was picking and choosing through the wood that I had, trying to find some that had interesting bark. And then I built this little trough here, and I lined it with this foil, and I mixed up a solution of Elmer's white glue and water. That's a 20-to-1 solution. 1 part Elmer's glue, the rest water. And I wanted it to be good and thin because I wanted to soak this bark in this thin glue so that the glue would be able to penetrate the bark and the wood and give the bark the idea that it can stay on this wood, because that was the whole idea, get the bark to stay on. I would soak it in the wood or in the glue for about a half an hour. My aluminum foil got a rip in it and it started leaking, so I ended up kind of rebuilding this little trough here and just glued it up good, and it leaked a little bit, but it worked well enough that I was able to get all my pieces in it and get them soaked down good. And then I would immediately, as soon as I pull it out of the trough, then I would turn it upside down so that the glue would be gravity would be pulling the glue into the wood fibers and hopefully giving that bark the idea that it should stay on there. I dipped each one of these pieces in the Elmer's glue solution 2 times. I don't know how much penetration I really got out of the second time, but I figured it didn't hurt to do it. The bark is really beautiful on this stuff. It's good and thick, and usually you don't ever see that when you're cutting wood, but oh my gosh, it's just gorgeous in a lot of places and really thick and layered. You can see here I got them all lined up here as I'm getting everything good and glued. Now I'm kind of sizing things up about how am I going to lay this out so that it looks decent. You can see in the lower left-hand corner where I joined 2 pieces together end to end. And the shelf that's sticking out towards us is also in 2 pieces. Sizing up where I'll put the antlers. I wasn't sure if I wanted to put the large ones to the outside or to the inside. Now I've cut a rabbit in the top board, and the shelf is going to lay in that rabbit, and hopefully that'll keep it from warping. I did not have any cross grain situation with this project, so that was good. You'll notice in the lower left-hand corner that some of the bark did come off there. And that area then I will cut off with the bandsaw and kind of give it a natural shape to it. Also, at this point, you might notice that the wood is a little bit thinner than it was originally. And all of those glue lines where the glue kind of dripped down the face of the boards, that's gone because I've ran this stuff through the planer again now after gluing that bark up the way I did. And the planer just pulverizes wood. I mean, it really gets vibrated hard. So any bark that had the idea it was going to fall off, it pretty well fell off during that process. So that left me with the bark that was serious about staying on. So that was probably a good way to go. Here you can see the other end and the irregular shape there that I'm going to have to come up with some kind of an end for it that looks halfway decent. Now, if you look over on the chalkboard, you can see kind of a simple drawing of my plan there. And the two pieces that go flat up against the wall, we're looking at the back of them right now. They get those, there's some pocket holes that have been routed into the bottom board and then it's screwed together. If you look on that drawing back there, you can see a line. That's where the screw is. So that was the idea with that. There it is, screwed together, and the rabbit is still nicely exposed, glued and screwed. Now, if you look over at the chalkboard again, you'll see 11 degrees and 13 degrees. That was kind of the random angles that I ended up with when I cut the backboard on the bandsaw. You can see where my hand is. It kind of rounded that off because I had to cut off that area where that bark had fallen off. And that left me with, on one side here, this looks like probably the 11-degree side, and the far side is the 13. But the shelf coming out, then I had to tilt my table saw over to 11 degrees so that it matched that angle that was there, so that it looked like it was all cut at the same time. And then the shelf itself, while it's in that rabbet with some glue, is screwed in from the back side. And I countersunk those screws so that the shelf could fit nice and flat against the wall. There's that angle again getting matched on both sides. Then I put the stain on, and oh my gosh, did it get beautiful. That cherry just looks so gorgeous. I had gotten it wet a couple of times while I was working on it, and I knew that stuff would really pop, but boy, I was really amazed myself. This is a water-based polyurethane that I put on this shelf, and boy, did it bring out the grain. It's just gorgeous. I also hit the bark with the polyurethane too, and a foam brush just to kind of get it to soak in there too. Hopefully this thing isn't too hard to dust. You can also see how thick the bark is in some places. It's just layered up and it's really a nice dark brown color to that bark. There you can see it again. Look at that bark. It's just gorgeous. There it is up at the top again. See those layers there? That's all holding together. And there's that knob. I kept that in. That's where our branch was forming. And here are the antler. And you can see where I've cut the back side of these antler so that there's a flat spot on there. Because when I bolt these onto the shelf, I don't want there to be any chance for them to wiggle and feel, funny when they're on there. So I had to come up with quite a fixture to hold these in place on my table saw. I had them mounted on my sled, and then I cut a flat spot off of the back of each of these. And oh my God, Anybody who's done this before is cringing right now because that stunk so bad. I could hardly believe it. After making the first cut, I ran out of the shop. I mean, this stunk like something I never smelled before. I had a hard time not to hurl because of this. It was that bad a smell. And I had to make 4 cuts. So once I got through the first one, boy, I was really dreading those last 3. Here you can see I got it clamped to the bench here, and you can see how those flat spots are keeping everything pretty well, I guess, coming straight up here, but well, there you go. They'll be coming straight away from the wall there. And all the tines are pointing up. So a guy could hang his hat on there. It could hang his keys on there. Anything that's got a loop on it could hang on there. And this thing is sturdy enough. You could hang your coat on there. It's not going to go anywhere. I was really amazed at the strength of those antlers. Here I've got my keyhole cutter in my router, and the board on top is just there because I've got some registration marks on that board. And then I've also got some marks on here with tape that are going to show me where to start and stop for my keyhole cuts. So there you can see where they're going to start and stop. And looks like I just finished one of the cuts here. This was my idea on how to get this mounted on a wall with no hardware showing. And I think it worked out pretty well. I guess we'd have to ask Mike. The starting points for each of these keyhole slots are 16 inches apart, which is your typical stud spacing. So he should have been able to get those screws into some good studs and then line them up on those holes. And that board that was above the router bit made it so that the slots were parallel with the surface of the shelf. So as long as you get your screws in level, the shelf will be level too. And that's what it looks like from the front. Looks like it needs some antlers, and there they are. I debated for quite a while as to what kind of hardware I was going to use here, and I even thought about trying to screw in from the back side and have no hardware showing, but I really don't know the characteristics of an antler. I don't know if it'll hold the thread well or what it does, so I really wanted something capturing it from the outside, so I counterbored these holes, and I thought this hardware looked pretty masculine and went along with the whole theme of this rustic shelf. So those grabbed the antlers really well and are not completely unsightly. This antler here, the furthest one to the left, is covering up part of the joint where I had to join that little piece. Looks like it's about 8 or 9 inches long there. The grain matched up color-wise pretty good, but I missed with the bark a little bit there, and just the tail end of that antler there covered that little bit up there, so you don't hardly see it. Can you see it? I was very happy with how this turned out. And here was the presentation day. This was my boss's boss, and he was retiring. And actually, I had started this before he had announced his retirement. And it just seemed really fitting because this guy was a major outdoorsman. And in fact, he hunts with at least one of his granddaughters, and he's got what he was calling a man cave in his basement where he's got some deer head mounted. And anyway, his granddaughter took exception to the name man cave, and she said, "Grandpa, can't we call it the hunter's cave, because she enjoys hunting with her grandfather so much." And I just knew this would fit in with what he had going really well, and he seemed to really like it, and I was very happy to give this to him. This guy was one of those bosses that you just wanted to do a good job for because you didn't want to disappoint him. He really got a lot out of me, and I had a lot of respect for the man. This is a picture of it actually in his house. And there, this is on the wall in his house. In fact, this picture was taken actually on this day that I'm recording this. So that is how the bark is looking 8 years after I built it. Looks like it's hanging on really well. And I asked him, how does it really look? And he said it isn't showing any signs of flaking off anywhere. The bark is just staying put. And also look at that, no fasteners. So he figured out my hardware idea. I also gave him another option for hardware where he could just face screw it if he wanted to, and I had kind of an ornamental screw for that. But I'm glad he went with the keyhole idea there. Looks like a plaque he was probably given at the time of his retirement. A wood duck, and look at that, some hats on some antler. That's just perfect. Looks like he's kind of always got an arrow hanging in there too. So that's nice. It's just perfect for a guy that hunts, isn't it? I was very happy to make this and give it to the right guy. Hopefully, maybe that becomes kind of an heirloom in their family there. Maybe that granddaughter of his that hunts with him will have it at her house someday. I had written something on the back of it too. The guy that had the farm where we milled this wood actually worked for the same company as us. Now, I don't know if this guy Mike knew him or not, but it's a small world. So I had written that on the back of where he's from. The guy lived near Lake Rathbun, which is near Centerville, Iowa. That's where that wood came from. There's another factor about bark and wood. I did a little research online about how to get bark to stay on wood, and most people just say it doesn't. But there was one article I read that said it depends on what time of year you harvest the tree. And I'm sorry, but I don't remember if winter was better or if summer was better. But it kind of doesn't matter, because when we milled these logs, they had been down for several years already. And we don't know if the farmer that downed this wood did it in the winter or the summer. As I recall, I believe he liked logging better in the winter because he could drag the logs up to his sawmill on the snow and the wood stayed cleaner. So if I had to guess, I'd say it was harvested in the winter.
I didn't realize it had been so long since I milled this wood. You can see I still have some of it with the bark on. So even maybe if you don't do anything with it, it'll stay on. I don't know. I'll have to come up with something for these pieces of wood. And I also have some of this up here that's got the live edge on it. This was, there's a local guy around here, Sawmill Kurt, that he needs a hand from time to time. This is walnut here. So that is just some beautiful, beautiful wood. And the stuff is just clear. Each one of those slabs is just gorgeous. So maybe I'll do a live edge project out of that stuff. Now is when I say, don't forget to subscribe. It was a really nice project we had there. I was really happy that I could make something so unique, one of a kind for him, and I'm pretty sure he likes it. Thanks for watching. Good, good, good.